Hey folks, on behalf of the Data Mesh Learning community, welcome to our meetup today, where we're going to talk about the anatomy of a data product. So let's get right to it. First off, in terms of our agenda, we're going to cover 4 topics. First off, obviously, we want to define a data product. We're going to talk a little bit about how to identify a product now that we understand the definition. We're going to try and take a look at how it fits into a broader ecosystem and why that's important to understand. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to go about discovering a data product now that we've identified them and understand their role. So let's get right to it. First off, I don't spend too much time on this. I think everybody understands the data mesh is an ecosystem of data products. There's obviously a communication backbone that connects all of the various data products. There's some version of a catalog, or as I like to call it, a registry, just to differentiate from things like Calibra. A data mesh, enterprise data mesh registry that provides a way to actually find and discover the data products in a data mesh. So I think that's relatively well understood. So let's dive right into the topic at hand. So what is a data product? Well, for those of you that have read Zemac's outstanding book, Data Mesh book, I think some of these things are pretty simple and well understood. Clearly, a data product has a boundary. It has an empowered owner. It's supported by clear contracts. And is enabled by a self-serve platform. There's also other things around federated governance, but in terms of the definition, for the purpose of today's discussion, those are kind of the key points. But let's go into a little bit more detail. So what exactly does a data product look like? What's inside it? What are some of its key characteristics and attributes? So we'll start on the left-hand side of the page, going from top to bottom. First off, obviously recognizing there's a boundary, we need to figure out a way to interact with data products. So there's several different ways that are quite common. There's APIs, application programming interfaces, kind of a REST type model. There's events where other data products or entities can subscribe to and listen for events from a data product, whether it's change data capture, for example. There's obviously queries, being able to directly interrogate the data product using SQL, for example. And obviously there's bulk data transfer, moving data in and out of the data product as necessary. The most important part here, though, is that each of these mechanisms of interacting with the data product have a contract. In other words, a well-defined description that explains how to actually interact with it. So for example, an API may have an open API specification that defines, the parameters, the request, the response, error codes, etc., in terms of how you would be able to, in this case, interact with a data product using an API. The data product can maintain any type of data. So I've illustrated on this diagram operational, analytical, and engagement. There's usually one set of data inside a data product, so that's just there for illustration purposes. But the point where I was trying to highlight is a data product can actually maintain, based off of the principles as Zemac has highlighted, any type of data, whether operational, engagement, or analytical. Now, obviously, analytical data has been the primary focus, and for a very good reason. That's where we need to pay most of our attention. So when you think about a data product, most times we think of analytical data inside the data product. But like I said, the guiding principles, as Zemac has highlighted, could apply just as well. And I've seen with my experience, they do actually apply reasonably well for just about any type of data. Now, each data product has a registry, so we can actually find out what's inside the data product, or how to interrogate the data product, or what the security policies, procedures are, or the owners. All that information is available in some data product registry. Again, I try to avoid the word catalog and emphasize the word registry. So there's metadata, information about the data product inside a data product registry, and obviously that's surfaced through APIs, for example. There's typically an immutable log that stores critical information, what's happened inside the data product. It may capture things around usage. We may be able to capture usage requests, change data, how the data changes, and perhaps identify data lineage within the data product. And obviously, more and more with the advent of the real-time enterprise, we're seeing, or at least I'm seeing, a lot of data products and data mesh capability in general, talking about change data capture, and being able to understand when something changes in the data product and being able to emit that information to downstream analytical sources or otherwise. The last key piece of the puzzle, obviously, there's a communication backbone. If you're going to have APIs interrogate the data product, you want to have your normal communication backbone. For event streaming, you probably need to have something like a Kafka, and obviously we all know how to do bulk data movement across the enterprise, but there's obviously a backbone that supports that capability. So with that in mind, I am going to open it up for questions. On the left, or rather right-hand side of the page, here's a few things just to start the discussion. How important are each of these data product capabilities? Are some more important than the other? Do all data products have a registry, or do they all need a log? So what is your experience? Is CDC a core piece of data products in your enterprise? Second question, what other definitions and capabilities do you use as you communicate data mesh in your organization? So I've identified some attributes and characteristics. There's probably a lot more. So I'd like to entertain a discussion around what a data product means to you in your organization. And then there's two more questions. What interface approaches are most common in your organization? I know the vast majority of interfaces that I experience right now or requests come through queries, SQL queries. Close second would be APIs, less common, but increasing in frequency dramatically is this notion of queries. So, or rather events. So there's a whole bunch of them, but what interfaces are most common in your organization? And then last question before I open it up for discussion, what are your lessons learned as you communicate the definition of a data product? What actually has worked? What has not worked? Any lessons learned? So I'll pause there and open it up for questions. Okay.
Quick question on a data product. Right? So question is a data product has its own dimensions, like conformed dimensions and master data, like product, customer, the common dimensions?
Sorry, can you elaborate on that?
So when you say a data product, for example, I can take an example of sales as a data product or customer as a data product to do analytics. So is the dimensions are all over the place in the company. Do you include those dimensions as part of the data products? So every data product has its own confirmed dimension informations like calendar, product.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we will talk a little bit more about what is actually inside the data product, but happy to I don't want to do all the talking here, so I'll open it up to the audience to see if there's anybody that wants to answer questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
In your slide, in your second slide, where you have the where I zoomed in on the data product, you have operational data, analytics data, and engagement data. Are those three data products?
They're there to represent the fact that any type of data can be managed by a data product. Rarely in my experience have I seen operational, analytical, and engagement data all in one data product. Conceivably, it could be done, but I have never seen it. We'll see when we talk about it a little bit later in the discussion. There's an element of granularity, and when you think about the boundaries, that suggests that you're probably going to have only one of the three in any individual data product.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I asked because we're also moving, finding our way around this. And we've considered that operational data, is internal to the domain, so it's no one's business. But so I found it interesting that that you use it to represent one data product as well.
Yeah, it's meant as an illustration. My apologies. I can see now why there might be some confusion. My apologies for that. So let me just let's go through a few of these questions. So these are some of the capabilities that my clients and in my experience a data product needs to have. Now, not every one of them are mandatory. Not everything needs change data capture, but things like a data product registry or catalog, I think are absolutely crucial. So in your experience, anybody can answer this, by the way. What do you see as mandatory or nice to have capabilities that a data product should actually represent?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say clear definition of and clear documentation and the clear metadata definition, clear identity of the owner of the data product.
Absolutely. And in your experience, do you keep all of that in a data product catalog or data product registry, or is there another way that you maintain that information?
Rather in a data catalog, in a centralized data catalog, unfortunately, but that's how often the way we do it.
Okay. Now, one of the things, just as before we move to the next next sequence in the discussion here, one of the things that I've seen in a data product, especially in the AI machine learning world, is this notion of reproducibility and traceability, which really says the implication for a data product is I need to keep track of what's actually happening in the data product. And it'd be ideal if I could actually correlate the changes in various elements of the information in the data product so that I can see how it has been transformed along its journey. How is that addressed in your experience? Is that part of the data product? Do you keep it elsewhere? And is it, again, maybe my experience is a little different. Is it critical or is it important?
Well, at least from my point of view, I think it's critical. I think it's very important that you keep track of all the changes that happen to the data, and you serialize all those changes. But I would say until now, unfortunately, it's not done within the what people usually call the data product, but it's done outside it. And I think that's one of the big changes that we are trying to push with the data mesh concept, actually.
Okay. Perfect. So I'll tell you what, because I think we're going to run out of time here. My apologies again for the nuisance at the start. There's a few other pieces. I'm going to eventually get to the point where we try and explain how we can actually identify the data products. But let's talk a little bit more about what a data product actually is. So this, I kind of used Zamek's book as guidance, and it talks a lot about kind of four different types of interfaces that we see out there. There's obviously the producer interface. How do I get data into the data product? I have consumer interfaces. How do I get data out of the data product, whether they're requests, subscriptions, queries, etc. How do I control the data product, whether that means I want to look at alerts, usage, or logs, or stuff like that. And then discovery and observability. How do I actually see what's in the data product, discover how it can actually access it through search, for example, and how do I observe the mechanics of the actual data product? So those are a few of the things that I see as core interfaces. So again, when we think about identifying a data product, it's important that we understand and have a common level set around what a data product actually is. In your experience, I'll open it up obviously to anybody, your experience, does this resonate? Is this what your clients are thinking as you've created data products? How do you expose this type of capability? Now I have my own commentary, but I'll wait till other folks have had an opportunity to question or comment.
I don't know much experience to draw on here since we're just getting started with this, but it seems like the producer interface is the least important or least rigid of them. Like that's sort of the sausage making of how the appropriately formed data product comes to be. And that could maybe be done in many different ways depending on the teams and their tooling.
Mm-hmm.
That sound right too?
Now you say it's the least important. Do you still see contracts being associated with data that's ingested? So APIs have open API specifications, files have file layouts and such. How important is the contract aspect of that?
Well, I think the contract is on the other boundaries here, right? Especially toward the consumer, but also toward the control plane and discoverability, which could maybe be part of the same.
Yeah. Now, I would agree that there's definitely some flexibility on the producer side. I think you're correct, though. There's least I guess there's the least tolerance for the least tolerance for change around the other ones, to control, the consumer, and discovery, observability, which really says that, in my experience anyway, is there needs to be some relatively solid, consistent definitions of the contract for the various interfaces. Has that been the group's experience? Okay. When we go through a few of the questions here.
Yeah, hey, Eric.
Yeah, go ahead.
As far as interfaces, I think one of the difference, from a mandatory perspective of having, you mentioned the metadata, and I think it's the interfaces that the discovery one are super important, because if I'm a user and I'm looking to find out what's there, what's the context of the data of that product, how do I get access to it, what do I have to do to get to it, that kind of thing to me would be important, really important, because just to know what's the, what's that product about, and do I need it, and if I do need it, then what's the next step to actually get access?
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. From a consumer perspective, the number one capability, if I understand what you're mentioning, is the discover interface. And very quickly, right after the discover interface, is the, I called it the search interface, but how do I actually access some data? Are kind of the number one, number two, which then allow you to move to the consumer interfaces. So that's been my experience also. I'm going to go to the next slide, and I think this is where I find, I'll be honest with you, I find the most challenges with my clients. So typically, my clients have read, a few of them have read Zemac's books. They can clearly articulate the principles of a data mesh. And then they come out of the discussion and say, this is perfect. What do I do next? How do I actually find an actual data product in my organization? So that's kind of the number one question that I get all the time. So I'll start with a little bit of how I look at this and what the approach that I take, and then I'd welcome any feedback, because I think this is, if you think about moving from principles into practice, this is probably the number one question that we need to actually address. So let me kind of give you my perspective. Conway's law is rather important, and I know a few others have mentioned. I think Zemac has even mentioned it during some of her presentations. But Conway's law says that any organization that designs systems obviously include data, is going to produce systems that look very similar to their organization's communication structure or their org chart. Why is that? mostly because that is the way that decision-making flows. That is the way that organizational accountability flows. And arguably, most importantly, that's the way funding flows. So my experience has been that however you define your data products, it is wise to actually pay attention to your org chart. If only because swimming upstream, my experience swimming upstream from Conway's law makes for a very difficult journey, leads over time to funding fatigue and a loss of interest. So the very first implication of this is, Conway's guidance suggests that as we look at our data products, that we should be looking at things that align as closely as possible to our organizational units, or at least where direct accountability, decision rights, and funding rights align. So there's some implications to that, especially we'll talk about what does that mean for bigger enterprise data warehouses. But nevertheless, that's the first guidance that I have, and I make recommendations to my clients. So the implication here obviously is what do I do with these central organizations that have organically grown to manage data in various enterprises. So that's kind of one thing we'll talk about, and I welcome feedback there. The second lesson learned that I've had is that granularity actually matters. So I'll give you a very practical example. Other folks have probably had this experience also. But in most organizations, they recognize the need for a chief data officer. And one of the first things they do is they create a map, and this is all the right things to do, by the way. They create a map of all of the various domains within an enterprise. And they're typically macro level. They typically have cross-organizational unit boundaries, and they typically have a very important governance role. So the typical example I have is enterprise client. So now that my clients have said, hey, I like this data mesh approach, let's have a data product for enterprise client. My advice to them is that's probably the wrong starting point for a variety of different reasons. But ultimately, it's far too coarsely grained to suit a data product. Why? It's hard to define the boundaries around an enterprise client. Most organizations, large organizations, have footprints in many different regional jurisdictions, countries. Every one of those regions or countries probably has slightly different rules around how you manage things like privacy, security, et cetera, which means that they also have different, identifying information, which means that the client information is actually different across each of those boundaries. So an enterprise client definition becomes very, very ambiguous, and it's hard to define boundaries. Now, because client resides in a variety of different regions, the question is really who is the actual owner of this? So the way to address that, in my experience, is that data products typically are much finer grained. And typically the rule of thumb I use is, can I point to the data? And if I can point to the data, it means I can draw a boundary around it. And if I can point to the data and I can find it, if I can point to the data, I can find an owner for the data, and I can find somebody who actually has real decision rights around it. What that typically results in is something that's quite finely grained. So in my previous example here, enterprise client, a more likely data product is commercial lending clients in the UK. So typically in that context, I can point to a region which has a governing structure. It has accountability, usually profit and loss capability, which means there's funding and decision rights, et cetera. But now what ends up happening is I can actually point to client data that is actually relatively granular, has a clear boundary, and has a clear owner who has the right to fund the evolution of that data product. So those are the two lessons learned that I have, but this does lead to a variety of implications and questions. So first one is, as I kind of touched on earlier, many organizations have these enterprise scale data warehouses. So the question comes, if that's one of the primary analytical repositories in an enterprise, what is a data product in that context? How do I actually create granular boundaries and owners? in this somewhat monolithic and centralized entity. So I'm going to pause there, and I would love to get reactions and perhaps ideas, lessons learned that have worked for you as you answer a very simple question, which is, your client or your executive, your manager says, love this data mesh thing. Where do I find these magical data products? How do you do that? And I'll pause there and open it up for questions and comments.
Eric, this is Brian.
Go for it.
So I would say one of the big things to look for is, let's see. So without skipping down to the third question, because I think that's easier to answer. Who's using the warehouse right now? Because frequently there isn't sufficient use of the warehouse. So it's important to find out who's using the warehouse right now, and then who did you expect to be using the warehouse? Because quite frequently, I just talk about my experience with in a manufacturer with a quality organization. They had all the manufacturing and quality data they needed in the warehouse, and they stopped using it because it wasn't sufficient to do the work they needed. How would you, if you're coming from the IT side, how would you know that people aren't using your solution? That's a problem. You have to get down. You can make some guesses at who should be using it, and you have to go out and talk to them. You have to go find out, are you really using it or not? And if they're not using it, what are they doing? And quite frequently, you're going to find a lot of Excel spreadsheets and a lot of things under desks. And that's where I've been most successful, trying to identify the people who are going to be the best domain owners, because they have a solution. They have a perfectly good solution in their warehouse. They're not using it. They built their own custom solution to work around the quality issues or complications in using that data themselves. So that's where I always start. Look for the Excel jockeys, and see if they're actually, and ask them if they're actually using the warehouse. I found, in my experience, at the last warehouse I was involved with, nobody was using it. And there were good reasons for that when we started to build our data product out in the quality organization. There were very good reasons they weren't using it, because it just didn't meet their needs at all. The data quality was horrible because they didn't have the domain knowledge.
Absolutely. I can definitely sympathize with that. I have clients at different ends of the continuum. Some are in exactly the situation you mentioned, Brian. And I think your approach is exactly the right one from my experience. And I have other ones where their enterprise data warehouse is actually central to what either a very large region or the entire enterprise in some cases actually do. It's core to their reporting. It's core to their AI machine learning capabilities and such. So different continuum, but I definitely understand what you're saying. I think your approach is the right one.
Well, that's great that they're actually using it. It should be central. They should be using it. It doesn't always happen.
Yep, absolutely. So let me just ask a question. So is there anybody on the call where they've actually have an enterprise data warehouse or a large data warehouse that is actually in use, and now the question is, how do I actually chunk it up into a data product? Well, obviously more than one data product. How, there's no rocket science, but it's a problem I run into all the time. So I would be very much interested in seeing how other folks have actually solved this problem. So I'm hoping there's somebody on the call that maybe has some words of wisdom for us.
Hi, this is Nishant. We do have an enterprise warehouse, but we don't have the notion of data product completely defined yet. However, one of the framework that we are exploring of thinking about how to define this data product is to separate out what Zama called in her book the source aligned data product from the consumer aligned data products. So what the previous speaker was talking about, like I can understand that coming from the user is a very good approach, and it gives a good starting point. But I also think we can look at it in addition to the user facing, consumer aligned side of things. We could also look at the source aligned, the people who are just dumping the data into the first landing data set, or whatever that may be, and draw the boundary of the first kind of source aligned data products there, because we anticipate and we are seeing that they understand the data that they are sending much more than, for example, consumers. At least they have the first-hand information about it, which they can use to cater to their consumers, whoever they are. And the consumers may also have their own data products that connects to the output port of the source aligned data sets and have their own transformation and own set of things going, and provide a data product that they themselves might end up consuming. So we're trying to draw that boundary so we can define these two as two separate things, and they have their own set of challenges, and we're dealing with each of these data products separately.
So Nishant, do you actually, that's great commentary and approach. So if you have the enterprise data warehouse, do you actually logically segregate parts of the warehouse into different data products? Is that your approach? And then you have governing mechanisms around each of them?
That is correct. Yeah, we are drawing the collection of data products that are source aligned data products. That's only job is to just get the source of truth information from an operational data store, or even events, behavioral data from customers, and that there's no aggregation, joining, whatever is happening. Those happen downstreams, and those are their own set of data products that are governed slightly differently.
Okay. Perfect. So other folks, any other feedback, commentary? Okay. So let me kind of talk about another concept that I use around how I define, and maybe define is one, maybe not the right word, but a data product does not exist in isolation. We've talked about it being part of a data mesh and ecosystem, but there's also a significant opportunity to harmonize and drive value out of a data product by understanding its producers and its consumers and being able to have them interact. And at first blush, it sounds relatively obvious, but in my experience, it's one of the key success factors for a data product. So let me explain why. So the example I use over here on the left-hand side is Airbnb. And in this context, what we have is an ecosystem. I think everybody kind of knows what it is. We have producers that have properties that want to rent, consumers who want to rent them, and Airbnb is a platform that brings those two together, allows them to interact and transact. So the analogy that I have here is Airbnb is, albeit the analogy breaks down a little bit, but Airbnb, the platforms, are external data products, okay? And they actually, ironically or interestingly rather, meet the expectations that Zamek has highlighted as kind of the four guiding principles. So first off, they're obviously self-serve. The Airbnb platform provides the ability to allow producers and consumers to find each other and interact. It has a clear boundary, happens to be a legal entity boundary. It has an owner, the shareholders who guide the evolution of this and fund the evolution of it. And as a federated governance mechanism, it has to operate in the rules and regulations of the land that they operate in. So now, so one could argue in a very high level way that Airbnb is an analogy for a data product. So what we find, and what I find with my clients, is we try and bring that concept of data product, platforms, the Airbnb concept, we try and bring that into the enterprise. So the reason this works remarkably well is because of the analogy people can actually understand immediately. So when we say we're bringing a platform or a data product like Airbnb into the enterprise, what does that actually mean? Well, it means that we have a platform, obviously, so data mesh. There's principles, and as we turn them into practices, there's a platform that ultimately provides data discovery, publishing, etc. But the important part is it actually allows producers to produce the data, but allows consumers to consume data. In effect, it brings them together through this mechanism of a data product catalog or a data product registry. It allows producers and consumers to interact, and presumably that interaction will drive not only immediate value, but it provides the context for the evolution of the data product. Consumers are asking for certain things. Producers will, if that demand is consistent and sufficient, then producers will actually address that demand and create new valuable stuff that goes into the data product. So that concept is something, in the notion of creating that ecosystem of producers and consumers working on the data product platform, is a core concept that I think allows maybe not so much us as practitioners, but allows us to communicate the power of a data product, and in a very simple analogy, what a data product does. And it may actually make it simpler to actually find and understand with your clients or your management or your consumers, to understand what it means to be a data product, how to help find them, and how to actually explain the value of a data product. So I'm going to pause there, and I personally have found this extremely valuable as an example. What's the reaction of the group here? Does this resonate? Is it something that is foreign, perhaps? Is it something maybe you've tried, you've heard before, and you've tried before with some success or not? I'll pause there and get some reaction from the crew.
Well, Eric, it's Olivier here. It definitely resonates, and I like the analogy, and that's also the type of analogy that I use also for my clients. I find though difficult to find the right incentives actually for producers to get into this mindset and to think about their data that they're producing as product, and care for them as products for the purpose of consumers that maybe they don't know yet, or for value that they don't foresee yet of their data. So the difficulty is to find the incentive, I find, to get these producers participate to this philosophy, I would say.
I think you're onto something really important, Olivier, around the incentives. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because I think that will drive another question. But anyone else with a reaction as to how they sell or communicate data mesh? Does the ecosystem concept, does the notion of connecting producers and consumers drive value? Any other reactions from folks on the meetup rather?
One quick question on this approach. I'm new to data mesh in general, so I may not be up to speed with everything. But it seems like here in this diagram, it seems like consumers are making decisions of which product to use, right? So if, let's say, for a certain use case, we have multiple products which are similar, is it consumer who will make that decision? So coming back to the earlier case where the product may not be high quality, how does consumer know which one is high quality in multiple versions of that product?
Yeah, my experience is a lot of the responsibility falls on the data product owner. The data product owner is their accountability, to be real clear, is to ensure that the producers create quality, or provide quality data. their job is also to understand the needs of the consumers, and be able to be the linchpin that connects the two, so that the producers can, you know, fix the data quality issues if necessary, or the producers can actually create new data if that's necessary to drive the value. So that's you know, my perspective is it's actually the accountability and responsibility of the data product owner to address that.
Got it. So they are constantly in touch with different consumers, making sure everyone's needs are addressed.
Yeah. Now, what that does say, though, is that the role of the data product owner is probably very different, at least my experience. Maybe I'm an outlier here, but the data owner role is quite foreign, at least in this context, quite foreign to what other organizations, or what most organizations typically do. So let me kind of explain. So a lot of times what happens is, you know, especially analytical data comes from a data warehouse background, or something where a lot of information by its necessity has to be brought together. It tends to be somewhat centralized, and it experiences the problems that Zama highlights clearly in her book. The resolution to that is obviously the 4 principles, but it provides a significant responsibility on the data owner. So I've heard, you know, the data owner typically in most organizations today would be an IT person. And they may be called something like the data steward or something like that. But ultimately, it seems that they are the ones that are doing a lot of the work around. They understand the data the best, perhaps, and they are advocates for its evolution. But they don't actually have the decision rights necessarily, or the funding rights, nor the need to actually go out there and reach out to consumers and reach out to producers and grow the data product. The data product owner is actually, in many respects, they're part engineer, part architect, part salesperson, part governance expert, part marketer, part, you know, communication socialization expert. They are all the things that are required to ensure the quality, integrity of data product, and actually the growth of the data product. So question for the group here is that what you're seeing as the expectation of the data owner? And is that the practical reality that you're seeing?
I'll comment again, having been in that data product owner role. There is not really an expectation of what that role should be in most organizations, because it's such a foreign concept to really take that product focused role with the data that you are that you have some responsibility for. Yeah, and it's a hard role because it does encompass all those things, and you can't. Product ownership is difficult anywhere, and it's really difficult in the data space because we've got, you know, it's like you said, they are typically people who come from IT. They're going to be focused on IT things, not on business things, and that's the big shift. You know, if you're going to focus on, you know, improving the, you know, if you're going to focus on improving the yield, just to use my example here, of your manufacturing facility, that's a business problem and an engineering problem. It's not an IT problem. And switching to give preference to the business side of that's difficult sometimes. And I think in my experience, in you know, my particular example here that I'll just stick with is, it requires a lot of domain knowledge that the IT folks do not have, and the product owner may not have if they came from IT. And part of that job is getting that, you know, getting up to speed as quickly as possible, or at least identifying the people who can answer the questions for you. It's a hard position because you do need to get out there and look for customers and take responsibility when things aren't right. And that is a difficult role to take rather than, but it's necessary.
Yep, absolutely. Now I'm going to come back to Olivier. I think it was you that highlighted the incentives. My experience has been the closer you can get to the real incentives at the business level, the better you're going to be. So for example, I've been in situations where we kickstarted a data mesh program based off of a very specific need by an SVP in a very big line of business that needed to enter a particular marketplace that they weren't in. In other words, there was a huge incentive to drive revenue if they could do this particular initiative quickly. So what we ended up doing is we ended up aligning. We created our first set of data products that explicitly aligned to delivering that SVP's business opportunity. And we were able to use the whole data mesh and data product concept to actually bring, for lack of a better word, data agility, not just delivery, development agility, but data agility to the enterprise. And we were actually able to deliver something far ahead of what the normal process would have required. So there's the demands come down to there's internal market demands, regulatory. I know in Canada where I reside, we don't have quite the privacy rules that Europe has, but they're coming to us. And that would mean that as we adopt a bunch of those stricter requirements, the data owner the data product owner has the incentive to actually, and they have the accountability in our model to actually implement those data privacy capabilities. And obviously there's some internal stuff, we need something to manage our enterprise in a more cost-effective way as a driver for data product creation also. So I know we're going to run out of time. So go ahead. There's a question, Kirk.
Yeah, just not a question. This is kind of our issues too around the data ownership is that our analytics is driven by is owned by one different area from the source of the operational. So it's in a lot of cases we don't have that from start to finish. So that knowledge is not deep in the analytical side. So we have organizational concerns of how do we shift that so that the operational analytical ownership is the same for a data product. And that's something I heard of which one to get over.
Yeah, I think, Kirk, I think you're highlighting a very important challenge for the data owner in the sense that the understanding of the data in the data product is disconnected unless there's some kind of very clear linkage between in many cases, the operational systems where, they're typically very reliable, stable data and the information is documented relatively well. And as it moves over, there's not necessarily an incentive to ensure that the data on the analytics side is documented as well, has the same level of quality, the same capabilities that are represented in the operational side. And I think that's why this notion of the data product being able to unify the producers and consumers and connect the value from, if I can deliver a particular new AI machine learning product on the consumer side, which drives the need to get better, different data, that I think is probably one of the better ways to actually link the outcome that you want to get on the analytics side with the source systems. I don't think there's any necessarily perfect way of doing it. It is a consistent challenge in my clients, but I found the data product and the whole data mesh ecosystem idea lets me move and have the right discussions earlier rather than later. Now, we're going to be finishing up here in just a few minutes. I think we have 4 minutes, so I'll just show a few, because there's been a few questions in the chat around data catalog or data, as I call it, data product registry. I'll just highlight, this is kind of the things that I have implemented before. And the concept is the data product registry is the thing that's inside a data product. In other words, a data product, to facilitate discovery, has to know what it has in it, the metadata, in other words, the ownership, the security policies, the tables, the database structure, whatever the case may be. but each individual data product has a registry. And that's typically, in some cases, there's a UX, a user interface in front of that. More often than not, what I find, and I'll explain why in a second here, most often it's a discover set of APIs that allow any entity to query the data product registry and say, hey, what are you about? What information do you have? And what ends up happening is, what I find is that the data products are actually the data product registries. Sorry. My apologies, it's zoomed past. The data product registries are actually part of an enterprise data mesh registry. So what I've seen and I've implemented is in this kind of federated distributed model, is the enterprise data mesh registry is really just a proxy and a facade and a user interface on top of the data product registries. In other words, just like the whole data product notion is federated, distributed, decentralized, the enterprise data mesh registry is also cognizant and recognizes the fact that data products are distributed. In other words, data products own their own metadata, and the registry the enterprise data mesh registry surfaces that data. So, and it's really the primary user interface to this registry is through the enterprise data mesh registry, not going directly to the data product catalogs, although that is, or data product registry, although that is definitely supported and in some cases required. The other interesting part is, again, the enterprise data mesh registry brings together all the local data product registries, but it also, in my experience anyway, we have a lot of data products that actually emit events, which are governed by a schema registry. So that schema registry and any API, open API specs to access that, or query inventories, supported performant queries for that data product, they all go into this enterprise data mesh registry. So I'll pause there and get, hopefully that answers at least a few of the questions that were in the chat, but I welcome your feedback. It's a relatively new concept. I think it's contrary to what some of the products are out there right now, but this has been my experience around what works. So I'll pause there and see the reaction.
It makes sense to me.
Thank you.
It does help to pull things together, so it makes, from a governance perspective, a discoverability, it helps, I think, foster that.
Okay. So, so folks, I know we have some data mesh practitioners who've actually gone out there and built some of these. Brian, I think maybe what's your experienced product owner? How did you surface the information in your data products? Did you have this notion of an enterprise data catalog or data registry?
I think that's something that I've been working on more recently. So I took in my building data products book, what I tried to do was say, in your data product, you're responsible for exposing the things you need to expose. Some of it should, a lot of it should be what you can, automate it. What you can't, write documentation, put that documentation gets deployed with your product. Now, what I think one of the nice things about the enterprise registry is, okay, so that's central to your product. And I think this is the model that you were talking about. Each product is responsible for a certain minimal set of documentation and metadata that they're responsible for. Hopefully that's automated or automatable, but that leaves that enterprise data mesh registry, I think makes sense. All of that data goes into the enterprise registry. And I think the big advantage there is you don't have to wait, because I think one of the historical patterns we have is, well, we'll put our things in the centralized catalog. And that is always harder than it seems to be. Now you do your own thing, expose it. The catalog can run independent. When it's ready, the data can be synced up.
Yeah. No, I think
that's a way to speed things up.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting a key point. So let me, I'm going to pose a question back to you. There's a lot of great products out there. I've used them a few times, things like Calibra, but they do a model, and I think there's been even some stuff on the Slack channel. They do information needs to be in that repository, put into, on some kind of timely basis, presumably. but data needs to reside in the enterprise data catalog. In other words, it's duplicated from, in our context, data products. The model that I've seen that works is, like you said, your concept of the data product owns everything about its data, its metadata, et cetera. And being able to have a very simple proxy facade to go and get that data in like literally real time, and it's always up to date, is a much more elegant solution. And it solves the problem, which I found is, as much as I'd love to have, you know, an enterprise data catalog, getting that data up to the catalog is no simple endeavor. It's not rocket science, but to get it there and have it of consistent high quality is a very difficult thing to do. I have not had a lot of success. Maybe that's just me, but I haven't had a lot of success in that model because, to Olivier's point earlier, there's not that many incentives to do it. So this model actually allows recognizes the distributed nature of the data mesh, and it actually goes and gets the data based off of, again, discoverable public data product APIs. And you get that the virtue of the fact that it's real time and it's consistent and it's up to date all the time. So anyway, I'm curious. I personally have not seen a product out there, but if anybody knows of anything, I have no axe to grind on vendors. I don't have any vendor allegiances. But I do know my clients would love to have some of this. If somebody knows something that does this type of thing, I would love it. I see somebody say DBT. I'll have to take a look at that more carefully. I did not see that capability in there, but great news. Okay, folks, we are over time. I can be happy to spend a little bit more time if you wish, but I don't have any more slides to share. I'll be happy to share this. So anybody who wants to have the copy of these slides, you know, just feel free to reach out to me. I have my LinkedIn there. I have my email. I'm also on the Data Mesh Learning Slack channel, so feel free to ask me there. But if anybody wants to reach out, the best way is actually through the Data Mesh Learning Slack. But again, if you want to, feel free to reach out direct. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And on request, I'd be happy to share these slides.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Hopefully this is value, and hopefully we're going to have a few more of these, and I look forward to further discussions, folks. Thanks again for your time, patience, and again, once again, my apologies for the early hiccups and getting rid of some of the nuisance at the start of the call. And I look forward to having some further discussions.